What?
Buena suerte. Good luck.
I no habla español. How's it going, everyone? We are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is great to, I would say see everybody, but I'm only being seen right now. So once again, welcome to the Culture Project Facebook Live series, Call to Love, Call to Hope. Tonight is Friday night. Hopefully everybody is excited about Friday night. Jesse's excited about Friday night. We're going to continue our book study on men, women, and the mystery of love by Dr. Edward Sri. Great book. This is my second time through it, and there's just so much gold in this. It is practical insights and reflections on John Paul II's love and responsibility. And if you're not someone who is really looking to get into the headiness of love and responsibility right away, this is a great place to start. And tonight we're going to be talking about chapter 11, and the topic that we're going to be talking about is contraception, and how John Paul II talks about how contraception actually harms love, and especially within marriage. And so tonight, before we get to that though, I want to introduce my guests, those that I'll be joined by tonight. We got Carrie and Jesse back in the house with us. Carrie and Jesse, how y'all doing tonight?
Doing well. Enjoying this spring weather. Summer's my favorite, so I'm getting ready to go.
Ditto, for sure. It's a beautiful day out here. Been able to enjoy the day. Overall, yes, can't complain. So, as well.
I love it. Carrie, would you like to introduce yourself for the audience again? Where are you from? Where are you calling in from? What team are you on?
Absolutely, yeah. So my name's Carrie. I am from Minnesota, the best state objectively. And and I am in my second year with the Culture Project, and I served in Toledo both years. So shout out to Northwest Ohio.
Right on.
How about you, Jesse?
As for myself, I am from Minnesota too. I'm actually south of you, Carrie? No.
Yes.
I'm south of
Yeah,
Carrie.
you're southeast, bro.
Southeast, man. I don't know my directions. Southeast of Cary, and I'm a huge fan of Minnesota as well. I am on Team Toledo, and this is my third year with the Culture Project, and so super glad to be here with all you guys that are here with us.
That's awesome. And once again, my name is Lucas. I'm originally from North Dakota. I live in Philadelphia, and I work for the Culture Project as a mission team manager, so I oversee two of our teams actually in the Midwest. Toledo is one of those teams. So I have the privilege of working with Carrie and Jesse. And I am also a huge fan of Minnesota. Go Vikings. Go Twins.
Go, baby.
Timberwolves, I don't really know how to feel about you most days, but
hey, but the Minnesota Lynx. Don't forget about them.
Yeah, you're right. You are definitely
Our ladies can ball, that's for sure.
That is for sure. Man, I was going to say something I don't remember. Anyways, awesome. For those of you who are just joining us, we're excited for you to be with us tonight as we continue this series. Once again, if you have any questions as we go along in this conversation, please feel free to put those in the chat box. Towards the end of the call, we'll have the opportunity to tackle some of your questions, and just in hopes that we are able to engage with each of you and just to see how it is that this book study has been affecting each of you throughout the course of these however many weeks we've been doing it. Because this is a lot. Like, there's a lot to this book, but there's just a lot to what the church has to say and what John Paul II spent his priesthood and his time as Holy Father really speaking to when it comes to human love, human sexuality, relationships, a life of virtue. And so anything you got for us, we'd love to hear from you. With that being said, we are talking tonight, as I said, about contraception. And with that, we want to just from the get-go say, like, we're planning, both Carrie, Jesse, and myself, to really approach this with sensitivity, approach this with mercy and with understanding, knowing that this is a topic that we can't just put blanket statements over all the time. It's very particular. There's a lot of different situations, and there's different experiences associated with something like contraception. And we just want to say from the get-go, we're going to be talking about teaching. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that John Paul II himself said and believed, and really just invites young people, but also married couples, to really embrace when it comes to the church's teachings on contraception, but also like the deeper understanding of what does it mean as a married couple to really experience deep union with the other. So with that being said, John Paul II, as he approaches this chapter, well, as Dr. Sri approaches this chapter with John Paul's thoughts, he really breaks it down into 4 different points that John Paul II made and was consistently coming back to regarding contraception. And so we're going to talk through those tonight. We're going to focus a good amount of time on the first 3, and then hopefully towards the end talk about the last one as well. But the first one that John Paul II stresses is that for sexual relations to become a true union, right, for a man and a woman, as they come together in a sexual act, for that to be a true union of what John Paul II say, true union of persons, it must be accompanied in the mind and in the will by the acceptance of the possibility of parenthood. Like that for John Paul II, he saw as like the precursor to like, this is not just an act, like a bodily act that is expressed by 2 people, but it's actually an incorporation of our mind and our will so that it becomes this union with another. There's a lot there. That's pretty deep. That is pretty deep. And he talks about as he says here in Love and Responsibility that, he says that one of the key ingredients needed to make the bodily union between a man and a woman an expression of an even deeper personal union of love is a willingness to accept the possibility that through the sexual act, quote unquote, I may become a father or I may become a mother, right? And this openness to the possibility of parenthood is crucial if love is to mature in a marriage, right? That love hinges in a marriage on this disposition. So with that, we're just really going to dive into this conversation with a question for you, Carrie. So before we really talk about like this openness to parenthood and really the beauty of that, I want to first start on the flip side of that with like, what is the attitude towards the person that is bred when we reject that possibility of parenthood?
Right. Yeah. So it's he brings it right back to that personalistic norm that we talked about in the very beginning of the book, which is very simply treating a person as a person and not as an object. And when you bring contraception into the picture, it really can kind of turn that from treating a person as a person, but simply to an object. And it's something that oftentimes it's not this like conscious thought of like, I want to use this person, because sometimes it can be contraception within marriage, but it can be happening even subconsciously. And I think what that really breaks down to is something that we share in all of our talks, which is the purposes of sex, which we break down as number 1, babies, and number 2, bonding. That is like the 2 purposes of sex. Like there's no changing it. No one can redefine it. Like that's what it is. In the same way that when you eat food, it both tastes good and like it gives nutrients to your body. Like you can't take one of those away. It's impossible. So in the same way it is for sex, but contraception, what it's trying to do is to take away the first purpose of sex, which is babies, which is just something that you can't do without fundamentally changing the nature of sex. And when you do that, all you have left is the purpose of bonding, which is, yes, a purpose of sex, but pleasure is like you can only feel your own pleasure. And it just naturally becomes the self-seeking, this selfish thing about like what I can get out of this, because it's rejecting the possibility that this could be, this could bring life forward for the 2 of us. So it's kind of impossible for it to be in a loving way to truly love the other person if you're rejecting that part of just the natural act of sex. And we see that in the world that is just so, our families are just so broken down. And that is largely because of just the onset of contraception. Because when you bring in contraception, well, then I can have a kid without having I can have sex without having a kid. Like, cool, that means I don't need to be married. But of course we know that contraception fails very regularly. And we are left with this world that thinks that sex is nothing but pleasure, and we can take away that child. So I think I just like bit off way more than we can chew for the moment, but there's a whole bunch to get us started.
No, you said a lot of really, really great points there, Carrie. And as you were talking, it just made me think, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit as well, especially for all of us, growing up in this culture, right? Like for those of you who may or may not know this, right? Contraception, especially being accepted by like Christian communities, really came onto the scene in like the 20s and 30s in the Anglican Church. And we've just seen how that is permeated. Obviously, the Catholic Church has never recognized this as something that is a good to practice, like contraception, to completely avoid becoming parents. Like that is something the church does not teach. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that there's a casualness that we have when it comes to this attitude of contraception, right? Could you speak to that a little bit? Even like maybe just like being a woman or just growing up in this culture, like how casual is that kind of an attitude when it comes to sex, when it comes to maybe even just, going through middle school, like how casual it is just to like be offered the pill or what have you.
Right. I think that it's so casual that I personally didn't even hear about contraception and that it's like not okay according to the church until I was like, I think actually 22 years old. Like I didn't even know because it's just so just like, yeah, whatever. Like you can think whatever you want to think. So I think that speaks to it in itself. And I was someone who like, I was never offered it in like the doctor's office or something like that. But I hear that so often from women that no matter what the problem might be, that it's just, oh, well, just take the pill, just like slap a Band-Aid on it, which isn't truly treating the problem. And we have lots of other Facebook Lives where we get into like the medical side of things. But yeah, I was thankfully not someone who was offered it, but yeah, it's just so casually just accepted in the world. And I think just the fact that I never even knew that is a perfect testament to it.
And so before we move on, Carrie, would you be able to, because I'm a guy, and so this isn't like as directly affecting me as it would a woman. So there might be people, might be ladies out there specifically who are thinking like, oh, like I was on contraception for a period of time, or oh, I am right now, and like I was prescribed for this particular reason, or what have you. Is there any point where that's something that it's allowed? Can you just like set that straight for us so we have a better understanding moving forward?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So using contraception is not morally wrong if it is for medical reasons, but it is also important to know how it's affecting your body because birth control is really hard on your body. And as I mentioned, you can look to all of our other Facebook Lives for the medical stuff behind that, but it is not morally wrong. And that morality comes into it when we're using it to remove the first purpose of sex from the sexual act so that we can like just use sex to get pleasure in a way. So that's kind of like the separation of the two there.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, so as Carrie mentioned, right, like morally, it is not wrong to be prescribed the pill, for certain situations like I have witnessed being with like acne. But even though it may have the potential ability to treat acne, there's actually better forms of medicine that treat acne. And so it could be also prudent just to look in what are your options are instead of taking the pill just because of the potential downsides of what the pill presents.
Yeah, and as we're on just kind of like the little bit of the scientific side of this, when you do move to using contraception for like preventing pregnancy to happen, it's actually oftentimes not preventing pregnancy. It's just ending a pregnancy really early, which is what we call an abortifacient. So it's actually just causing an abortion because it's like one of the ways it might be doing that is by causing the lining of the uterus to not be suitable for the egg to properly implant. So there is a human person present that is fully formed, has all, or not fully formed, but has all the DNA. All they need is time. But it's creating a hostile environment and it's causing an abortion. So this is really, really serious when we talk about contraception, particularly within the sexual act.
Yeah. And Jesse, I love the point that you brought up just about just encouraging to see what the other options could be, because I don't know, Carrie, you might have other things to say about this, maybe a little bit more than I would, but it is one of those things that's handed out like candy, really. And I know it's one of those things that it might not be directly said that this is your only option, but it's presented as the only option. And so just an encouragement is, just to see like what could be out there if it is something like acne or whatever the other situation that you might be being prescribed for, is just to look like what are the actual health benefits to this, and are there other options out there for me? Great points, everyone. With that, Jesse, I'd love to hear a little bit from you. Just, we've talked about the reality of this, not just contraception as, a pill that you would take, or, something that you would stop the possibility of parenthood for or with, but the attitude that is the contraceptive attitude. Like, what are the harms, maybe individually, but also as a society, of this kind of attitude? And with that, what role can we play in speaking truthfully to other people regarding contraception?
Yeah, great question, brother. So St. John Paul the Great talks about how ultimately, whether we like it or not, whether it's advertent or inadvertent, what this leads to is that it leads to rejection of the other person, and it ultimately prevents this personal commitment towards love. So like, as much as we can sit here and try to like live out a life of love, like our actions also have to mirror that. And it's just something that we have to be aware about. Along with that, as Carrie mentioned a little bit of this, of just like how instead of the focus being on this potential, this outward potential of us being co-creators to life, at the end of the day, what the sexual embrace is reduced to is, we're engaging in this act of mutual pleasure. And ultimately, psychologically, what that does is that instead of us focusing more on just like me or we, like the whole goal when engaging in sex is, of course, the deeper bond and union of the spouses, but also this potential towards life. And that's like the beautiful aspect of like the sexual embrace and our faith, is like this openness to life, this openness to be co-creators with Christ, which is such a beautiful thing. And that it just isn't present there when contraceptive sex is engaged in. And so those are like two main harms that I can think of in terms of just this attitude towards contraception. In terms of what role we can play, I first want to start off by like, anytime we have this conversation, like it's always in love and charity. Just like always being aware, like we're not here, to like point fingers. We're not here, to be like, oh, I'm the smart one in the room or anything like that. But rather like, I just want what's best for you. And so just like a mutual understanding, especially for the person who's relaying this message, of just like, no, like I like want your good. And like, I just want to offer you this resources to like help you make the best informed decision. Along with that, always just seeking to understand where the person is at, what they've undergone, what has led them to the potential worldview that they may have when it comes to contraception. So always seek to understand. It's just a rule of thumb, honestly, for anything and just really any relationship. But also not being afraid to educate. And personally, I'm the oldest of five, and as the oldest brother, I have three brothers and one sister. I have a great responsibility to my siblings in a way that it just is different from my friendships, so on and so forth. And particularly having a little sister, and even with my brothers, right? Like naturally, as I want their best when it comes to their education, or when it comes to their diet, or when it comes to their physical activity. Naturally, particularly for my little sister, like I want the best for her health. And it's kind of crazy living in the world that we live in, right? Like we live in this world where, we got people who read every food label that they have, are very particularly in the food that they consume, are very particularly in the things that they do, the media that they consume, so on and so forth. I think contraception a lot of times, because this is something that for a lot of women is prescribed at the age of 16, some women earlier, right? So it's not something that, a 16-year-old may have the education on. A lot of times this is just like, here you go, as Carrie mentioned, and like, like, here you go, use it, take it every day, it will solve your problem or your fertility, right? And I think it's completely important to educate. And like with my sister, I want the best for her, just as I would any human being. And as her older brother, like it is my responsibility, my duty to protect her, to serve her. And I want what's best for her when it comes to her fertility. And so when I think of something like contraception, where, you take out the packet of contraception, just like with any med, right? They're going to tell you the side effects. The pill packet I've honestly never seen something so long in terms of just like all the side effects, all the precautions, etc. And to name a few, I mean, you have weight loss, sore breasts, acne, nausea, irregular periods, mood changes, to name a few. And this is something that is naturally being prescribed to 16-year-olds, right? And so I think of my little sister, whom I love dearly, and ultimately, like, is this a good to her, right? Is this doing a just service to her? And it's hard for me to say yes. I mean, it's her specific case. I can't, advocate for anyone else, but for her, just this recognition of this is not an inherent good for you. And maybe there may be a case, as I mentioned when we were talking earlier before, where, you know what, this is actually the best prescribed medicine. If that's the case, I mean, that's a whole different subject. But I think knowing the potential downsides of it, that like we are responsible for educating our family members, our friends, even those who want to engage with us in this conversation, just the truth of the pill, what its ultimate goal is, and ultimately like how it works against the natural cycle of women. I think that's like the biggest reason why I personally am just not an advocate for it, because it's literally countering the natural fertility cycle that God has made for women, which is good and beautiful. And unfortunately, like our world doesn't echo that, right? Like our world doesn't echo the good and beauty of a woman's fertility. And so that's a little food for thought right there. Yeah.
Jesse, speaking for all the brothers out there, man, I love it. I love it, man. Oh man, that's great. Before I have a couple, one point, just what you were talking about when it comes like the harms of the attitude that contraception breeds. Like we've really just seen how this hasn't just like stopped a few people from having babies, but it has created this mentality that like we have a right to children,
mm-hmm.
right? It's created this like this like it's turned the sexual act into this just simply like this exchange of services, if you will, in certain ways, right? And overall, like it's completely broken the need for babies to be seen in the context of marriage. Like all bets are off. And so I think alongside just like the biological, the scientific elements of this conversation, but then also just the reality of the how this has really deconstructed society in a lot of ways. It's just good to take a step back for all of us who might be listening online, but even ourselves, like how is this harmed and what can we do on the flip side of that to really help restore everything that God originally intended when it comes to individuals and, like you were saying, Jesse, like a woman's fertility and just man and woman as we are, as he made us, but then also marriage, the family, having children, so on and so forth. With that being said, before we move on, I just want to ask if either of you have any like resources that you might point somebody in the direction of, maybe something like a book or somebody who particularly talks more in depth about like the biological side of these things, like anything that y'all know of.
Yeah, a book that I can think of is by Jason Everett, If You Really Love Me. I think that's a great book. It goes into a lot of different topics, one of them being contraception. And he really goes not only into the science, but ultimately the ramifications that it has, not only for, the person involved, but families as well as our world as a whole. So I think he does a really good job at just being concise to the point and letting the reader, have what they need.
Awesome. And I would say, obviously, I would turn to the church document, Humana Vitae, by Pope Paul VI, that he wrote, really rejecting this at a time where it was kind of up in the air what the church was going to do. And he really put his foot down, speaking for the church through the Holy Spirit, and really speaking that, the church stands for life and this openness to life and marriage. So that's a great place to go as well. With that being said, it brings us to point number 2 that John Paul makes regarding contraception. And he says that when the idea that I may become a father or I may become a mother is totally rejected in the mind and will of husband and wife, nothing is left of the marital relationship, objectively speaking, except mere sexual enjoyment, as we've been saying this whole time. one person becomes an object of use of another person, which is incompatible with the personalistic norm. So that just basically sums up everything that we've been saying so far, as John Paul II saw that this is what not only objectively happens, but will happen in a society at large. And this really brings us to the point that openness to life in the sexual act is an indispensable condition to love, as John Paul would say. With that, how is it that the openness to the possibility of parenthood is not only something that's desirable, but how is it that that's necessary for deepening love within, say, a marriage? Jesse, what would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I want to, I guess, point out to the relationship of Christ with us, right? And the reality that his love isn't held within the Trinity, right? It's spread to all of us, his sons and daughters. And in the same way, when you think of the love between a man and woman, right, especially on their marriage day, where they basically make this commitment to die to self, you very much see this elaborated in such a greater way when there's this understanding of, our marriage, and likewise this relating to sex, it's a free gift of each other, right? It's total, I totally give myself to you, I withhold nothing back. Both spouses engaging in that mindset. It's faithful, right? It's just me and you, right? No one else, it's just me and you. And then this reality of this openness to life, to be co-creators with Christ. And so we just enter into this beautiful reality of experiencing a bit of what Christ experienced in creating us, right? And just that union, and that mystery of my son, right? My daughter, that the beautiful aspect of creation, so to speak. And so simply, I just think there's such a beauty there that really only, married couples can understand. I personally have not experienced it, God willing, as of yet, hopefully in the future, but there's just such a beauty there of entering into that embrace with Christ.
I was muted. Sorry, I muted myself. I was just saying that it's to truly embrace that, that co-creative quality that God has allowed us to partake in, but to do it with another. Mm-hmm. And John Paul and Dr. Sri actually talk about how that's one of the greatest affirmations that a man or a woman can give to the other in marriage is I am giving myself to you so much that I would want not only another you in this world, but that I would want to raise that other you with you. That's just profound. That's just such an affirmation of love.
Yeah, and it's so selfless. I mean, you think of Christ on the cross, right? And him selflessly giving his life up for us. And in the same way, a husband and a wife recognize that, because you think of having a kid, and we can sit here and talk about the beauty of having children, which children are beautiful, but there are present difficulties that come with having a child, right? Waking up in the middle of the night multiple times, the care that they may need, so on and so forth. And just it's such a selfless act of you recognize the hardship that may come, right, from raising a child, that it's going to call us more out of ourselves, more from the things that I want to do or you want to do, but we want to enter into this good together.
Absolutely. Carrie, do you have any thoughts over there?
Yeah, I think I love what Jesse mentioned about the Trinity, because I think that's one of the most just beautiful of, we have in the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and it's from the love of Father and Son that the Holy Spirit comes forth. And that's the same thing that we have an opportunity to mirror the Trinity, that God wants us to participate in that. And that's through mother and father, through their love, bringing forth another life, which if you think about it, that's crazy. We can bring forth life out of love. I don't think we just sit with that thought enough. So take that to your holy hour, because it's incredible the way that God has allowed us to participate in his creation. I think that also just ties right back very practically on the chapters we're talking about friendship, and it's striving towards a common goal. That's what friendship is. And then in the next chapter is talking about the subjective and objective aspects of love, and that you need to have friendship at the core of even marriage, because that is that solid ground that marriage is resting on. And well, by having two people come together and creating another life, that's literally a common goal. You've created a common goal for you to work together towards and to continue to deepen that friendship, which is man, God really knows what he's doing up there. I think that's just so cool.
Yeah, it's as if he's had a plan for all this from all eternity or something.
Yeah, something like that,
It's
man.
baffling to me. No, yeah, it's incredible. I don't know if you ever said this in your chastity talks, Jesse, but I would get into talks, especially with guys. You know, it's one of those things that as a guy, I was never thinking about this at 16. You know, like I knew it existed, like I knew it was the fact, but like it's not. I wasn't emotionally wrapped up in this and anything like that. And so I would walk into a classroom and just be like, you know, guys, 1+1 more often than not does equal 2. Like it always does. However, there are situations where it can equal 3 or more. And like, that is the sexual act. Okay. And like that, you know, you see dudes are like, what, whoa, you know, it doesn't take much for us guys, but it's what you're saying, Carrie. It's so true. Like that co-creative quality, which is humbling to realize that God has made us truly in his image and likeness in that way. With that being said, just to get your thoughts on the flip side of the question I asked you earlier, Carrie, how does this openness really break down that egoism that John Paul II has talked about in past chapters that eventually destroys love between spouses?
Right. Yeah, I think it's very simply that, I mean, a sexual act is no longer just the two of us, but he kind of explains it as you're now standing side by side looking outwards and you're accepting the possibility of life. And that's just naturally turning you away from selfishness, that this isn't about me, that I'm willing to let this lead to something that's about another person. And it's going to require a lot of sacrifice from me because parenthood requires a lot of sacrifice. And I think another piece too is just that we're willing to let go of control. That like I'm not in control. A child is not a right. And whether or not I want to have a child, if I'm going to have sex, that's not my decision. If I'm going to have sex, then I need to be open to that life that can flow from it. So it just kind of naturally like leads to that, like being open to like having another life and not being so in control, but instead turning it into trust and like allowing God to take control of our lives and to, yeah, just like turn outward to the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was totally going to ask you a question, but I blanked on what exactly that was. Anyways, just want to say quickly before we move on, for everybody who is just joining us, who joined us at some point in the middle of us starting and getting to the point that we are now, welcome. I just want to say, if you have any questions throughout the course of this conversation, please put it in the chat box. We'll get to those towards the end of our call. Tonight, we're talking about what John Paul II had to say about contraception. And so we're midway through that conversation, and there's been a lot of great things talked about so far. So if you haven't had the opportunity to hear everything, please feel free after the call to go back and check it out. There's a lot of great stuff that we've been talking about through the course of this. And we'll move on a little bit and just talk about, you know, Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, a real hero for really anybody aspiring to be a saint in today's day and age, and just the love that poured forth from this woman. Like I can't tell you the amount of stories that I've heard about this woman that are just incredible, like heroically incredible. And she once said that the child is the beauty of God present in the world, the greatest gift to a family. I just think of, I mean, that statement, but also just what Mother Teresa represented for not just the church, but just the world, as like this woman who was just like so completely open to life, no matter the physical shape that it took, you know, like she was living and serving the poor in some of the worst places in the world. And, you know, just the heart that she had to be able to open herself up to life in any way, shape, and form. And so how can, especially when it comes to children, because she had a lot to say specifically in the realm of abortion and just the openness to life that men and women should have, how can children be viewed less as a commodity, especially for couples to enjoy, or like you were saying, Carrie, as a right, and more as an invaluable gift from God? Like, how can we see children in that light? Anybody want to jump on that?
Yeah. So I think Ashley says in the quote that they are an image of God in the world. So that like a child is like another piece, like every single person on this planet is kind of another like eye into who God is, because God is like this vast being that we will never be able to like fully understand or comprehend, but every single person gives us another little piece of that, because every single person is completely unique, which I think is why that helps us to see people as not as commodities, because commodities are things that we can create and we can produce, and if we lose it or something, we can just go buy another one. If we break it, we can go buy another one. But like not so with people, because people are in the image and likeness of God, and each person uniquely. So like it's kind of just the core of like human dignity. Like you are the only you that exists. Like you are the only image of God in this particular way, exactly as you are. And like that is absolutely beautiful. And I think it's a beautiful way to see children as a gift.
Absolutely. Jesse, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that it's kind of cool to see life from the perspective of my parents. I mean, I've been fortunate to have a mom and dad that love me and my siblings really well. I mean, they're not perfect, but man, they try and try and try, and I appreciate the love that they pour on me and my siblings. And just like, regardless of what I literally could do the worst thing imaginable, and like their love for me would like never change. And like that is just something where like I mean, I just don't understand that, you know, to the magnitude of their love, just because like I have not been in their shoes. I haven't experienced you know, having a child. But it's just so beautiful, just like thinking from the perspective of my dad, or the perspective of my mom, of just like, to them, like me and my siblings, like we're just gifts, you know, like just like, yeah, like sure we may argue at times, like sure we may disagree, but there's just like this inherent understanding that like regardless of what happens, regardless of what you do, like you are my son, you are my daughter, and like you are this gift that God has given to me.
It just reminds me of what my parents I was a little bit of I would stir the pot growing up. Just to say the least. Anybody who knows me out there, you probably know that. But I just remember my mom and my dad saying every now and then, like, gosh, I don't like you right now, but I love you. And, you know, and it's just like that quality of like, even though like those times where, you know, you drive your parents nuts or you do something that they're not super crazy about, yeah, that quality of just being a parent, that is, you just see like their love is steadfast, which is ultimately the Father. You know, it's like, that's like the love of God the Father right there, right? We see it all throughout the Psalms and all throughout scriptures. And anyways, really great thoughts, guys. Just want to also say, if you want to continue along that line of just really reflecting and diving more into what Mother Teresa had to say, refer to Psalm 127 verses 3-5. That's a great place to really sit with just like the awe of, you know, everything that Mother Teresa had to say when it comes to children and being made in the image and likeness of God, things like that. So want to bring us to point number 3 that John Paul II said. He talks about, you know, when because sexual intercourse is needed for the good of deepening marital relationships, that it's not just for procreation. John Paul II actually says that the sexual act is an interpersonal fact, that it's an interpersonal act between spouses, that it's also meant for, as Carrie was saying in the beginning, it's not just babies, but it's also bonding. It's both, you know? John Paul II shares how couples should be open to the possibility of new life coming from the sexual act, but that they do not have to enter sexual relations with the specific intention to have a child. Right. So it's this kind of like balancing act that John Paul says is like, we have this internal disposition that we're always open to the gift of a child. However, my particular intentions coming into it doesn't have to be with my spouse. Like, we're going to have a baby tonight, you know, like, no, like we're going to make a child tonight. No, that's like, it doesn't, he says that that doesn't have to be the case. If that's the case, great, but it doesn't have to be the case. And he goes on to talk about how couples can continue to have intercourse since they themselves have done nothing to inhibit the possibility of conception, right? Especially when it is that they might be trying to avoid a pregnancy, or it might be a time of infertility. He says that couples can do this by 2 things. Number 1, by monitoring the natural patterns of a woman's fertility, right? As Jesse was kind of alluding to earlier. And number two, by choosing to engage in the marital act during times of natural infertility. So we just want to be able to throw those out there for maybe any couples who might be watching this. Just when it comes to point number three that John Paul II makes with, couples being able to, or allowing the sexual act to be something that brings them together as a couple, as spouses, right? Because it is this unitive thing that obviously is in the plan for love and sexuality that God has from all time. So just something that I felt that John Paul II would obviously really want us to talk about, and just urging that the disposition is at least interiorly open to new life. Bottom line. Okay. Feel like we've covered that. Hopefully everybody got that. Brings us to the final point. Well, point number 4, John Paul II talks about something called periodic continence. What? What does that even mean? Jesse, what is he talking about? Periodic continence? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
Lay it down for us.
John Paul, the great, is talking about here is that in certain situations, couples may experience situations where they desire to avoid conception of a child. And so because of this, they are, in a sense, allowed to abstain from having sex. And I think with this, it's important to distinct it from contraception, just because this is working in the natural order that we human beings are created for, right? Like NFP, which is natural family planning, like that works with our biological cycles as male and particularly female. And so it's important to distinguish that reality of like, this isn't, another, just like a better form of contraception. On the other hand, no, it's actually not. It's working in the natural order that God created us for. And I think the beauty of NFP is that, especially in the world that we live in today, where the idealism of sex has just been promulgated, it shows that like, it's like a clear testament, like chastity is not just a, single man or woman thing. Like chastity is also meant for married couples as well. And like in this, moment of periodic continence, the couple has this opportunity to love each other in like, in different ways, that is outside the realm of having sex. And so you can even see chastity being further engaged in by that reality of periodic continence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just also to the point that you were making, Jesse, about, it not even being in the same realm as contraception, just for those of you out there, definition wise, contraception, the root word contra actually means against, right? So it means against conception. So it would actually be like, logically, it wouldn't even make sense to call this natural contraception, right? Like it wouldn't even, just like definition wise, it wouldn't even make sense. So just to reiterate everything that you said, Jesse, absolutely love it. And I would love to talk about a little bit here, Carrie, unless you have a few things that you want to know before we move forward. No?
I think one thing just to throw out there for the world that we live in today is when we're talking about this periodic continence and the reasons why it should be practiced, that like we ought to be careful and not using it as like, well, I only want to have 2 children. We can still kind of use it as a way of kind of maintaining that control. So really just like truly searching and making sure that we're not kind of almost using it for those selfish reasons, but like asking ourselves like, am I not financially secure in a way that we won't be able to take 3 trips to Disney World this year? Or am I not financially secure that I won't be able to feed and clothe this child? So just like really asking like those tough questions, that we're not just kind of using it in a way to kind of still selfishly control our lives and how many children we want to have and things like that, but truly still being open to life and just being open, like as open as we can possibly be, and using this only in those proper circumstances, which you can refer to Humana Vitae to get more detail on that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Which brings me to the final parts of this chapter, which I think some of the more intriguing thoughts that I've ever seen from John Paul II when it comes to just like what he talks about when it comes to periodic continence. He encourages couples to approach this with a lot of discernment and just a lot of thinking about like what is truly the good of this family, not just maybe avoiding a pregnancy or spacing pregnancies, but also like that openness to life, like bringing into the world more children for the sake of your family, like for the benefits of your family. And and your children being raised in a family of, you know, multiple siblings. I just thought it was really intriguing because he kind of, Dr. Shree notes that he kind of, in a way, is like alluding to like it seems like his opinion of like the perfect number of children being around 3. And he gives some really intriguing points as to why that might be. Do either of y'all remember what he talks about?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think he's really in saying not even just like the perfect number, but the minimum number. So like really it's like the more the better, but you should at least have 3. And it's kind of because of what we've been talking about, like with that image of Trinity, that when there's 2, well, there's just 2. And like, yeah, they can look out for each other, stuff like that. But once there's a 3rd child, they're not only looking out for each other's good, but they can work together to work towards another like 3rd person's good, which is beautiful and incredible and continues to increase the more children you have. But it kind of brings it back to like, well, 3 is really kind of that ideal number of having at least 3 children. So of course, not speaking against those who have like fewer than that. And there are couples, of course, who are only able to have that many children. So we're not like speaking against those who have fewer than that, but that's just kind of his like philosophical thought of why like 3 or more, if possible, can be a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are not saying that anybody who has less than that many children, that you are a bad parent. You are not a bad parent if you have less than that many kids. Just making that clear. John Paul II just has very particular thoughts about what that good could do for your children, and raising them not just to be great people in society, but also just teaching them of, you know, what does family life look like, and teaching them the virtue of love and everything that comes with that. So go ahead, Jesse.
To that, I think like the inherent point that John Paul is making here is just like the openness to life, right? That like, because as human beings, like whether we like it or not, we just have this desire to control so much. We see it in just a lot of aspects of our lives, and like especially when it comes to, you know, creating life and being co-creators within life, of just like being open as Christ was in the cross, you know, like just having the opportunity to allow him to like don that blessing if he so desires in children.
Absolutely. Yeah. Would either of you be willing just to share, like, because I know that all of us here come from a family of at least 5. Like, what was it like being raised with that many siblings? Like, what did that kind of upbringing do for you, and how have you benefited from that?
It is the best. I love it. So I'm one of 6. I'm the 3rd of 6. I'm one of the middle kids. And I think one of the biggest things it does, I mean, we're talking about this like egoism and selfishness, stuff like that. When there's 6 kids in the house, that is purged right out of you, because you are not the only person in mom and dad's life. Like, you need to take your turn. You need to share. Just like all that natural stuff that comes with having more siblings just forms you into being someone who's just not always, and I'm not saying either that like if you're an only child that you're like self-centered and you only, you know, I'm not saying that. I have some great friends who are only children, but when there are more siblings, that's something that I know it's forced me is to like always recognize when there are more people, and to be just kind of more self-giving, if you will. And it's also just like so much fun. Like, even if I have 3 siblings that aren't home, I still have 2 siblings that I can hang out with. So just like numbers wise, and when it comes to like being grandparents, like you're multiplying your grandchildren like crazy. And we know how much people just delight in grandchildren. It's like the more children there are, the more grandchildren there are. And that's just a beautiful thing to have, like these big family get-togethers. Like, it's just an absolute joy, which isn't to say that like it's all flowers, because of course it's difficult sometimes, but a lot of that beauty oftentimes comes from making it through those difficulties. So I think it's great. I'd highly approve, 2 thumbs up, have a big family.
Jesse, how about you? What was it like growing up, all that testosterone? I know exactly what that's like, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's very similar. I've been, I have, 3 brothers, 1 sister. And I mean, honestly, the best memories are like, especially, so I have 2 brothers that are really close to me in age. And then I have a younger brother and a younger sister who are about half my age. And particularly like with, my brother Jordan and Julius, like I can remember times where, like you have one person in the shower, one brushing their teeth, and like one outside the door. And we're just like talking up a storm, having fun, like getting ready for school, sports, and just like the opportunity to play together with all of our friends within the community. That was a huge highlight just growing up, of just like our parents letting us go outside and us just being kids, and even too reflecting like what my parents would say of just like, you know, when my brother Jordan came to life, or even when my brother Julius came to life, and just like how we responded to them, you know, just like, because as a little kid, right, like there's just this like, whoa, like, you know, here's this little person that's introduced into the world, and just like this kind of novelty that came when my little siblings came along, and like how inherently it teaches you this responsibility, which like I feel like I know I have today because of those experiences of you know, having siblings. And of course it looks different, you know, for anyone who is an only child, but just for my experience, like I could not imagine not having my siblings in my life, you know, like my little sister, and just like having a sister and what it's taught me about women. That's a whole story within itself. I could write literally a whole book or two on that. It's been another gift.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm one of 6 as well. Number 3, the first middle and the favorite middle is what I always say.
That's right.
So any of you 3 of 6s out there, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, 5 boys and a girl. So tons of testosterone. We're all 6 kids in 8 years. My parents are, God bless them. God bless my parents. It was a lot of fun. I'm right there with y'all. Like, it was, obviously growing up, you don't appreciate it. But I think for myself now, like I've grown in so much appreciation now that, as you were talking about, Carrie, now that there's like grandbabies, now that I have a niece and a nephew, I just see, especially my nephew, he's 5, just seeing how like or 5 going to be 6 or 6, somewhere in there. Sorry, Brady, you're out there. Just seeing how he responds to uncles, you know, and just like my uncle's responding to him and just like wanting to wrestle and like just loving on him. And then my niece, like I never grew up with younger sisters. So now seeing like my brothers and I being able to respond and protect like our little niece, it's just beautiful, man. And I just have grown in so much appreciation for my parents and their openness to life too. It's really, really a gift, So
yeah, and it just kind of continues to perpetuate that, like bringing people together, because like I have 2 nieces and another niece or nephew coming soon. And those little girls are just someone who also brings the family together. And then we've got like, even just looking at like my family's calendar in the upcoming couple months here, I mean, if Corona wasn't a thing, we've got like graduation, we've got ordination, we've got this person's birthday party, like that person. There's just like more people equals more events equals more family time, which just then like perpetuates that like family bonding. And it's just like this beautiful, beautiful cycle.
Absolutely. Amen to big families. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so we have a few questions that we want to be able to answer before the 8 o'clock hour. This one comes from Amber. Amber, shout out to you. She asks, how do you go about explaining the wrongs of contraceptives and theology of the body in general to people who are living a life contrary to this without seeming judgmental or unloving? Where would either of you start?
I would start with just their story. So not starting with like, hey, contraception is wrong. Did you know that? And just like immediately pushing content in their face, but getting to know them as a person. So it definitely depends on your relationship with the person. And just like really getting to know them, getting to know their story, their background, and like maybe they've never heard this before, because there's a lot of us out there who have never heard this before. So definitely just approaching out of love and through their story. And then oftentimes too, just approaching through questions can be really helpful. So instead of giving them statements of like, you should do this and you ought to do this and this is the truth, just approaching through asking them questions, and that's kind of helping them come to the truth on their own. So I think that'd be 2 pieces of advice from myself.
And I think with it, Amber, I would just encourage you and anybody out there who might be in this particular situation, is I feel like we easily, especially if we have a friend or somebody that we really just want to speak truth to and we want to help them see what we see, that we can easily be bogged down by this need to know the facts and to know them perfectly. I think exactly what Carrie was saying, get to know their story, ask questions, show that you care, but then also just witness to what it is that these truths have done in your life. Just simply like the greatest witness is your joy. It is like how you've been set free. And I think obviously getting down the basics of what the church teaches when it comes to contraception, and then also what is theology of the body and all of that. Don't be bogged down by the tendency to have all the answers, but then also be willing to say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to dive into it with you. I think that that's always a great place to start. Last question that we have, would love to hear your thoughts on this, Jesse. This comes from Long. Shout out to Long. He says, is it also considered use if your only intention for intercourse is a baby and no bonding?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think it points at a talk that we give in human dignity and in the purposes of sex. And so there's two main purposes of sex, right? The first being babies, the second being bonding. And so if we are to approach sex from the standpoint of, I want babies and no bonding, or I want bonding and no babies, inherently we're not living out the purpose of sex. And so we've, kind of deconstructed it to this reality of what we want, which ultimately, we're playing God, we're in control. And so I would definitely consider that, use when the full purpose of sex is not lived out to.
Boom.
Right. Yeah, it's shifting that, I don't want to bond with you, I just want the baby. You're then kind of like using the person as a vessel to have a baby. So it just kind of is leading, which is an interesting question, because it's something that the bonding, at least on a chemical level, is unavoidable. Oxytocin is going to be released whether you like it or not. But yeah, it is a very interesting question. Good food for thought.
Yeah, you would have to try harder to not bond than any. I don't know. It is an interesting thought.
It is.
Thank you for prompting that reflection, Long. Awesome. Well, Carrie, Jesse, any final thoughts for our folks out here who are watching? Anything you want to conclude with?
I just like to throw out 2 resources for the ladies out there if you want to learn more about your cycle and how your body works, and because contraception really is the counter that's working against that. So to learn the positive side of how you can work with your body, 2 just great resources. 1 book, it's called The Fifth Vital Sign, and then there's also an app called the FEMM app, FEMM. And that's just a way where you can start kind of tracking your body's natural cycle. It's something that's good to do even if you're not married or not engaged, even if that's way out in the future, but just to get to know your body and how that works, because your body is a beautiful, beautiful gift, and God has created it in this incredibly miraculous way. So just for the ladies out there, there's a couple good resources for you.
Yeah. And with that, if there's if any one of you are want a greater knowledge, especially on just speaking on this, feel free to reach out to us, especially through our Facebook page. We, are on Facebook every day, and we would love to answer any personal questions that you may have. And so I know that, the door is open.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you both for both of those concluding thoughts. With that being said, we've come to the end of our night. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for coming alongside us for this conversation. Hopefully you've benefited from not only tonight's conversation, but all of the Facebook Lives we've been doing throughout the course of these number of weeks in our Facebook Live series, Call to Love, Call to Hope. All of our videos, they're all on our Facebook page, our YouTube page. So please, if any point you've missed anything, go and check all of those out. They're all online for you to continue to receive whatever it is that you might need from them. And again, just thank you so much for partaking in this book study with us on the book Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love by Dr. Sri. Once again, this is the book. Great book to read. Next Friday will be our final Facebook Live with our book study on chapter 12. And we're going to be diving into some basics on theology of the body, the really precursor to that. That's Friday, May 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And with that being said, just want to thank everybody who made possible our recent days of giving here at the Culture Project, and just your generosity has just been so felt by this entire organization. And I speak on behalf of the entire organization of the Culture Project. Thank you for all of those who've contributed financially to our mission continuing. Because again, this is God's work. This is inspired by the Holy Spirit, inspired by the life of John Paul II and the teachings that he put forth, but then also just the greater church. And so we just thank you for really supporting us in the work that we're doing, and just supporting the messages of the dignity of the human person and living the virtue of chastity. So with that being said, Carrie, Jesse, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, God bless you.